Hello and welcome to This Really Happened, a place where unbelievable, heart-touching true stories come to life. Sometimes surprising, sometimes bittersweet, always real. Grab a drink and settle in. We're about to begin. Male friendship is a special bond, accessible to the understanding only of those who have known its depth and strength. For a real man, a friend is often closer than a blood relative. This kind of friendship doesn't arise suddenly and isn't destroyed by minor disagreements. Once kindled, it can last a lifetime, withstanding the test of time and distance, remaining strong and unbreakable. Exactly such a comrade was Billy for Robert, a boy 2 years younger from a troubled family. Billy's parents often abused alcohol, leaving him and his 2 younger sisters unsupervised. The children were eventually taken to an orphanage, but Billy escaped from there after just a couple of weeks. However, that time was enough for his parents, forgetting about the children, to hastily change their place of residence for an unknown reason, about which various rumours circulated. The boy flatly refused to return to the state institution. He was barely 14 years old then. He decided to live independently in his parents' empty house. The boys who had known him almost since birth helped in any way they could, bringing food and warm clothes. They tried for a long time to hide his escape, but the truth came out anyway. The guardianship authorities returned the teenager to the orphanage again. Robert then managed to persuade his parents to help his childhood friend. His father, Arthur, a former military man, was able to find relatives willing to take guardianship of the boy, and Robert's mother, Eleanor, a lawyer, helped with the paperwork. From then on, Robert and Billy became more than just comrades. Of such people, they say, they'd go through fire and water for a friend. Robert's parents, of course, had concerns about such a friend, but they did not voice their worries to their son aloud. Robert owed Billy his life. One day they were by a river where the ice had already melted significantly, but still seemed strong enough to hold a person. Taller and heavier, Robert tried to avoid areas with thaw patches, but this did not save him. The big guy in a heavy father's sheepskin coat and felt boots instantly fell through the ice. Fortunately, he managed to surface and grab onto the edge. His clothes quickly became soaked and started dragging him down, and his legs began to cramp. Luckily, Billy didn't lose his head in the critical moment. They say that in moments of danger, a person's hidden reserves are unlocked. Apparently, this was just such a case. Skinny and short, Billy grabbed Robert by the collar of his sheepskin coat and pulled with all his might. He himself couldn't understand later how he managed to pull out his tall comrade in waterlogged clothes. Fear multiplied his strength tenfold, and he not only pulled Robert out, but also dragged him several meters away from the ice hole. The boys fell onto the snow, breathing heavily and trying to recover. When Billy lifted his head a few minutes later, he saw that Robert was crying, smearing snow and blood from a wound sustained in the fall across his face. "What's wrong? Did you break something?" he asked, trembling either from the cold or from the ordeal. "What? The wound? It's just a scratch. Don't whine. You're a boy. Did you finally manage to get into Dad's felt boots?" Robert croaked. "They're from the army. Some kind of trophy. He'll kill me." "He'll kill you, but don't whine. He won't. We'll go to my place now. You need to dry off. Otherwise, he'll definitely kill both me and you. Yours don't like me much as it is, and then they'll completely forbid us from being friends. But how will I go with one felt boot?" At this moment, 12-year-old Robert surprisingly resembled a small, helpless child. He thought for a couple of minutes. In the end, he took off his boots and gave them to Billy, wrapped his own foot with a scarf, and put the wet felt boot on Billy. In the evening, after drying his clothes as much as possible, Robert returned home. Billy's aunt Martha guessed from the dirty tracks in the hallway that the boys had gotten into trouble, but she didn't scold or question them. She generally took little interest in her nephew, believing that this way he would become independent and serious faster. And Robert came down with severe pneumonia. However, he never confessed what caused it. It was one of their many shared secrets. His parents were never able to find out what had happened. About the missing felt boot, Billy said, "We tried drying it on the stove, got carried away playing, didn't notice it burned." The story was implausible, but Robert's parents had no choice but to believe it. Martha, who had taken guardianship of her nephew, tried to provide him with clothes and shoes. She had no time to worry about his moral character, upbringing, or studies. Even the influence of good friends didn't help. First, he simply stopped informing her about his movements and company. Then he started staying overnight at his friends'. To all her remarks, he replied with the unchanging, "You're not my mother." Billy committed his first theft at 15. At this time, Robert was diligently preparing for exams to military college. The second theft was complicated by an assault on a watchman, and Billy, along with his so-called buddies, went to a juvenile detention centre. Although he did not participate in the assault itself, the others dragged him along, and he considered backing out cowardly. The friendship that began in the sandbox and went through many trials did not break, but moved into a different dimension, memories and rare letters. Robert continued to be interested in Billy's life and tell him about his own. Despite the fact that some letters came from military college and others from detention, the boys still found common topics for conversation. Perhaps this is the charm of youth, when we are able to close our eyes to the non-essential and see only the good in people. Robert's parents were wary of their son's association with a guy of questionable reputation, but they had long given him the freedom to choose his own friends. Robert would later grant the same freedom of choice to his own children, and he wouldn't regret it. A person either learns to take responsibility or shifts it onto others, later blaming everyone around for their life not turning out well. After college, Robert entered a military institute and then rapidly rose through the ranks. He got married, and twins, a son and a daughter, were born into the family. Life flowed in a calm channel. News from his old friend came less and less often until it stopped completely. In his last letters, Billy almost stopped talking about himself, only once casually mentioning that he was fortunate enough to meet a real angel in his life. He himself did not go into detail, and Robert decided not to pry into his soul with questions. Through acquaintances, Robert repeatedly learned that Billy was alive, but serving another sentence. There had already been many such stages in his life. It seemed he had become so accustomed to such a life that freedom no longer beckoned him. He didn't know how to settle down, how to earn a living, or if there was even any point in reforming. Everything there was familiar and habitual. Robert's parents had passed away by that time, and Billy's aunt, Martha, also didn't live long. Only old acquaintances remained in his hometown, so Robert rarely visited there. He tried to sell his parents' apartment several times, but there were no buyers. Renting it out was also risky. There was no one to travel and look after it, and the likelihood of running into dishonest people was high. However, unexpectedly, Robert's class prefect, Susan, decided to gather former classmates, and it just so happened that Robert had a short vacation at this time. At a family council, they decided to give the head of the family a couple of days off and send him to his hometown. At the same time, he planned to visit his parents' grave and stop by his former class teachers. Sarah did not go with her husband, as she had urgent business at her shop. September 1st was approaching, and the demand for flowers would instantly increase. It was necessary to order popular items. At the station, transferring to the suburban train to his hometown, Robert noticed an elderly man who struggled to climb into the carriage and sat by the window. Something about his appearance seemed surprisingly familiar. He sat so as not to lose sight of the man, observing without attracting attention. It seemed this old man was significantly younger than his years. Robert himself had just turned 40 at that time, the prime of life, as his wife said. They went to the gym together, loved active recreation. A healthy lifestyle and warm family relationships had a beneficial effect on their appearance. Even among colleagues, Robert looked significantly younger than many. Most officers, having reached certain heights, stopped taking care of themselves, gained excess weight, and looked simply ridiculous during exercises. Robert always set an example of excellent physical fitness, easily completing forced marches. His wife also often attracted attention with her toned figure and perfect appearance. Her husband didn't make scenes. On the contrary, he was proud that his wife was a dream for many. Their children were often told that their parents looked like their older brother and sister. The man Robert was watching closely looked over 60. Grey hair, sunken cheeks covered in stubble, a hunched back, and a terrible cough betrayed his age. There were moments when he almost suffocated trying to clear his throat. Every half hour he went out to the vestibule, took a drag, held his breath for a long time, and exhaled clouds of acrid smoke. Robert, who had disliked the smell of tobacco and alcohol since childhood, winced every time he looked at the man. A healthy lifestyle was instilled in him by his father, Arthur, who had never smoked a single cigarette or touched alcohol in his entire life. At the same time, he was a model of integrity for his son. Apparently, this man was not so lucky in life, since he found solace in harmful habits that were destroying his health. The strangest thing was that Robert, who had an excellent memory for faces, could not remember this man at all. He was absolutely sure he had never seen him before, yet something about his appearance was familiar. The man returned from the vestibule after another smoke break, and unexpectedly their eyes met. Surprisingly, the man's eyes were young, although surrounded by a deep network of wrinkles. It seemed he was also struck by the thought that Robert was familiar to him. But his memory or Robert's appearance was better. Genuine joy lit up his face, and he impulsively took a few steps forward. Then, as if remembering something, his face changed sharply. He turned around and quickly went back to the vestibule, and from there into the next carriage. For a few seconds, Robert was stunned, and then he almost ran to catch up with the man, not believing his eyes. Billy! It was his friend, his childhood comrade, daredevil hooligan. The friend who saved him when Robert fell through the ice. The friend who couldn't live in a state orphanage and then spent most of his life in prisons. Prematurely aged, hunched, thin, and sick. But it was him. Robert had no doubt. Despite his completely changed appearance, he recognized the look of his old comrade, direct, a little impudent. Robert practically ran through the next two carriages, scanning the passengers as he went. At this time, the conductor announced a stop at a station, and Robert saw through the window that Billy had gotten off the train and was walking quickly towards the village. There was still about half an hour's ride to his hometown, but the man couldn't miss the opportunity to talk to his friend. So, without hesitation, he jumped off the train step and ran after the receding figure of his comrade. "Billy, stop!" he shouted. Robert saw that Billy increased his pace upon hearing his name called. Fortunately, the healthy and physically active Robert ran fast, and so after a couple of minutes he caught up with Billy and stopped in front of him, blocking his path. "You recognized me too. Why did you run away?" he asked. "Buddy, go on, I don't know you." With these words, Billy tried to bypass Robert. The smoky, hoarse voice resembled Billy's voice, but Robert began to doubt. Had he made a mistake? Maybe he wanted so much to believe that upon returning to his hometown, he would meet his old comrade, that he had mistaken some stranger who resembled him from a distance. Less confidently now, he spoke to the man again. "Come on. I saw how happy you were to see me there in the carriage. You couldn't not recognize me. Are you offended that I didn't write? But it's not my fault I didn't know your address. I wrote as much as I could, and then I tried to find out where you were, how you were doing. I've lived in the same place for many years. Is that what you're offended about?" "Buddy, I'm not a woman to be offended. You've mistaken me for someone." The man started looking around, as if afraid they would be overheard, and then said more quietly, "You shouldn't be seen near me. Go away. Why would you want problems?" Robert barely restrained himself from rushing to hug his old comrade, despite his warnings. "You old devil! But thank God! I thought I was losing my mind. How are you?" "Pretend you didn't hear the questions. Keep looking around," the man said. "Go to the station. The next train is in an hour. You won't get home from here on anything else." "Are you going to your parents?" "No parents. They've been gone 5 years now. It's a shame. They were good people." "And who are you going to see?" "To them, to the grave. Decided to gather for the class reunion. I'll be home if anything. Come by in the evening." "I'll stop in." With these words, Billy walked away with a quick step, as much as his limp allowed, and Robert went back to the station. What had happened seemed like a dream or a very fortunate coincidence. It was during his rare visit to his hometown that he was lucky enough to see the person with whom fate had separated him many years ago. School years flashed through his memory like a whirlwind, their friendship with this brave, desperate, and sometimes reckless guy. How much he had come up with, how many times they had gotten into trouble because of him, how many times Robert had brought home and fed his friend, who was hungry as a wolf cub, and who tried to take the best pieces with him for his little sisters. Yes, Billy's life was not easy even in his youth, and it seemed to have severely battered him since. He looked like a real old man. Robert remembered his 70-year-old father shortly before his death. Billy looked significantly older now. Waiting for the next train, he reached his hometown and first thing went to the shop. If Billy came in the evening, he needed to be properly welcomed, like back then, in childhood. He remembered that there was a meeting with school friends today, but decided it could wait. Billy was more important to him. Moreover, his behaviour had alarmed Robert. Calling Susan, the class prefect, he warned her not to expect him at the meeting. Unforeseen, important matters had arisen. Susan was noticeably upset. It seemed the whole meeting had been organised just for him. Robert even remembered that in school she had shown him signs of attention. She was an exemplary girl who had matured early, and he was still naive about relationships with the opposite sex then. Only a military career was on his mind, although when he met his future wife Sarah, he decided that this was the girl who would someday become his wife. In the evening, there was a quiet knock on the door, and almost immediately the door opened and Billy walked in. "You still haven't learned to lock doors, just like your parents," Billy smiled, and for a minute he was again as Robert remembered him, and they hadn't seen each other for almost a quarter of a century. "Yes, that's my habit. My wife always scolds me. Less so now, she's gotten used to it, been married a long time. Tell me about yourself. I'll tell you. Come in. I've put something together for us here for our unexpected meeting. Remember how you always tried to feed me? Couldn't accept that I was skinny and small and you were healthy, even though you were younger than me? Billy smiled again, remembering their carefree childhood. I remember. It's unclear who I took after. My parents were thin, but I grew like a weed. Only in college did I discipline myself, started eating less and spending more time on sports. By the military institute, I was already lean and fit. My children are thin too. Apparently I took after the neighbour. Remember the old man who lived on our landing, the fat one? Your parents would have a fit if they heard you. You always blurt things out without thinking. The comrades spent half the evening reminiscing and talking. Robert noted that Billy first thing pounced on the bottle, which Robert, who didn't drink himself, had bought just symbolically. Under the influence of alcohol, Billy became more relaxed, even a bit rough, although it was clear he was trying to control himself. At the beginning of the evening, he either evaded questions about his life or answered vaguely. After drinking, his tongue loosened, and he recounted the unhappy story of his life to Robert. Listen to this. You have a wife, children, a career, and I have nothing to tell, only how I changed prisons and committed crimes. The only thing I can be proud of is that I didn't harm a single living creature, didn't even touch animals. And thefts. Who among us didn't commit them? Not everyone got caught, that's all. And you know about my first episodes, as a minor, out of foolishness. It was hard in prison then, scary. I wanted to be free, with friends, adventures, fun. Only that fun led me back behind bars again, and life there is far from sweet. I won't tell you everything, there's no need for you to know. Only once, one of my cellmates received a letter from his sister, and a photo of her was inside. She was 22, I was 25. You won't believe how many girls I'd had, but this one just wounded my heart. I asked for permission to write, and you won't believe it, she replied. We started corresponding. I even started behaving excellently, eager to get out to her. I got out, came to her, but her parents kicked me out the door. They didn't know about our correspondence. I knocked on their door for a month, persuading, convincing. I even got a job to prove I had reformed, but they wouldn't budge. In short, I backed off a little, decided to give them time. I started living a normal life. That was probably the best year of my entire life. I got a job as a loader, had money, spent it all on her, bought her gifts. She refused to take them though, but I had the motivation to work, to live a normal life. Her parents only relaxed their vigilance 6 months after I arrived, and we started meeting secretly. But everything secret becomes known sooner or later. She got pregnant. Her parents found out. An abortion was impossible, the term was already long, and her health was weak. In short, they filed a complaint against me, and I went back to the zone. And soon after, she gave birth to my daughter. I have nothing. I haven't seen my daughter even once. She'll be 15 soon. She doesn't even know my name or who I am at all. Her parents strictly forbade their daughter from telling the girl anything about me. Made friends, what are you talking about? When he found out I was going to see her after prison, he ambushed me and celebrated with his buddies. Who needs a relative like that? She's smart, beautiful, just finished university. The fact that she replied to my letter back then was nothing short of a miracle. In short, my daughter grew up without me, and I never managed to fix my life. So I kept bouncing around, changing zones. Until one day I received a letter from her. She wrote that she was very ill. I lost it, honestly. I had 5 years left on my sentence, and the doctors gave her no more than a year. Do you understand? My beloved. I never loved anyone else after her. I didn't have anyone after her. Everyone seemed the same, brainless, empty. In short, I ran away. I ran away so I could see her in time. That's why I got scared when I saw you. Nobody remembers me here anymore, and if they do, they probably won't recognize me. Life has battered me. But it's okay. At least I'll live the last few years in freedom. Even if they look for me, I won't surrender alive. I thought I'd lie low and then figure out how to live on. After that, I went straight to her. She lived not far from here. I made it. Robert saw how difficult the story was for Billy. I made it. I went to the hospital to see her for a whole week. Her parents didn't forbid it anymore. They were old, and I wouldn't have harmed her anyway. But they didn't let me near my daughter. They only let me see her from a distance. And they didn't tell her who I was. She passed away, yes, she burned out like a candle. And soon after, both her parents. Yes, her mother only survived her by a week. Her heart couldn't take it, and her father by 2 weeks. And who is your daughter with now? That's the thing, buddy. My daughter is left alone. She's facing the orphanage. Help me. I'm asking as a friend. How can I help? I'm nobody to her. Take her under guardianship. Come up with something. Your parents, remember, they helped me out. They didn't abandon me. But they found relatives. Does your daughter have anyone besides you? And an uncle? I can't. And the uncle drinks. Ever since he got out of prison, he couldn't live normally. They won't give the child to him. I can look for relatives who can take guardianship of her. Buddy, I'll be indebted to you for the rest of my life. Ask for anything. Just don't let her end up in an orphanage. The rest of the evening, the men spent talking about children and how to help the girl. Billy, weakened and exhausted, quickly got drunk and fell asleep. But Robert stayed awake for a long time, thinking and recalling the past day. Besides the issue with the girl, he had to figure out how to tell his wife and children everything, how they would react, whether they would understand him, whether they would judge him for having such a friend. In the end, Robert concluded that it was best for them not to know anything. He could make inquiries without informing them. However, he had to act quickly. In the morning, he called everyone who could help in any way. They offered various options, even for him to take the girl under guardianship himself. This option seemed the most sensible to him. A 15-year-old girl is practically an adult. She'll be completely independent in a couple of years. He and Sarah would look after her, get to know her father. In short, Robert decided to pursue this direction. He didn't voice his plans to Billy yet. He promised to help, left him some money for the time being, and allowed him to live in his parents' apartment. It had been empty for many years anyway. As for himself, it was time to return home. So, how was the reunion with your classmates? Sarah met him as if he hadn't been away for a couple of days, but for a year. Oh, it was fine. Everyone's gotten older, put on weight, become uninteresting. Not much to talk about with anyone, Robert lied. The feeling was disgusting. He didn't lie to his wife. It was better to say nothing, he thought. Why lie to a loved one's face? Not with anyone at all. What about your friend you told me about? We didn't go to school with him. He's older than me. Didn't see him either. No, Robert lied again. Sarah was surprised that her husband returned thoughtful, quiet, and taciturn. He often went to talk on the phone on the staircase, constantly received messages. He answered all questions monosyllabically. Like any woman, she decided that on this trip he had met some old love. Past feelings had flared up, and that's why he was suffering. She didn't want to think about the fact that he had left home more than 25 years ago and had hardly been back since. Finding the most obvious reason, in her opinion, she didn't consider other possibilities. Meanwhile, things with the guardianship of Billy's daughter were going well. Robert managed to arrange a postponement of her placement in the orphanage, but he needed to urgently come to the guardianship department and bring documents. He told Sarah he was being sent on a business trip. However, she found train tickets to the same city he had recently gone to for the reunion. The puzzle pieces fit, and Sarah was finally convinced her husband had someone else. And the next day, she saw him in a shop. He was buying clothes, warm teenage clothes. Who could he be buying them for? Their daughter Emily's size was significantly larger. It seemed he not only had an old love somewhere, but also a child. Sarah couldn't bear such betrayal. Her first impulse was to go up to her husband and find out everything. Later, she would regret many times that she didn't do so, as it would have saved her from suffering and uncertainty. But all that would come later. For now, she said nothing to her husband, returned home, and waited for him to come back with explanations. However, as it turned out, patience and meekness had never been her strong suits. So she decided to find out everything herself. Following her husband, she noted the train number and the destination. So she bought a ticket for the same train. To be honest, she regretted giving in to the momentary impulse as soon as she was in the building entrance, but it was too late to back down. She called the children and warned them that she and their father would be away for a couple of days. The more perceptive son, James, understood from his mother's voice that something was wrong. "Mum, is everything okay? You never go anywhere without us." "Dad has a business trip, and I decided to go with him so I wouldn't be bored. I had some time off accumulated at work anyway." James pretended to believe her, but his mother's explanation worried him even more. Robert, unaware that his poor cover story and his wife's imagination could threaten their family's existence, anxiously considered his next steps. The best solution would be for Billy to surrender and then for Robert to handle the adoption himself. However, Billy firmly stated that he would not return to prison. Robert didn't press him, deciding to return to that conversation later. It didn't even occur to him then how drastically his life would change. For now, he was simply going to meet the girl, Billy's daughter, who didn't even know who her father really was. George and Elizabeth, the grandfather and grandmother, who had reluctantly allowed Billy to spend the last week near their daughter, Mary's mother, strictly forbade him from seeing Mary. And Mary was brought to her mother in such a way that she would not cross paths with her father. Robert used all his acquaintances and connections, which turned out not to be so many. Since Mary was already quite grown up, he was allowed to take guardianship of her. However, she could still end up in an orphanage at any moment. All the property of George, Elizabeth, and her mother would pass to her, but she could only formalize the necessary documents after she turned 18. For now, she continued to attend school, but social services employees came to look after her. As he was informed, the girl was very independent, quiet and modest, like her mother and maternal grandparents, explained Susan, the acquaintance who was helping Robert with the paperwork. "And do you know who the father is?" "I do. An old friend of mine. He wrote me a letter, asked for help." "And why doesn't he handle the documents himself?" "He's in prison." Robert didn't lie about the kind of person the girl's father was, but he didn't say that Billy had also escaped. "Wonderful! Where did such a friend come from in your crystal-clear biography?" "In childhood, we don't choose friends, we just make friends. And then such bonds appear that you can't break them. Besides, I owe him my life. Could I really refuse him such a request?" "Oh, that honesty and integrity of yours will backfire on you someday. What did your wife say about all this?" "She's not against it. She doesn't know," Robert admitted honestly. And frankly, I don't even know how I'm going to tell her everything." "Are you serious? You're taking guardianship of a grown girl who doesn't know you or her father and recently lost all her relatives. And you haven't even talked to your wife and children. Where will you bring her? Where will she live? What will she wear? How will the school issue be resolved? Connections are good, of course, but I can't cover for you forever. My good advice to you is, talk to your wife and tell her everything. Otherwise, you risk changing your life drastically, and it's not certain it will be for the better." The acquaintance helping with the documents was the same Susan, his class prefect. Communication with her was a little burdensome for Robert, as she transparently hinted at a closer relationship. Therefore, her concern for his family didn't seem sincere, rather the opposite. But there was common sense in her words. Secrets from his wife could ruin their ideal marriage. After this conversation, Robert really wanted to talk to his wife, but that evening, Billy called to ask how things were progressing. During the conversation, he coughed terribly. Robert didn't like this cough and directly asked Billy about his health. "Things are bad, buddy. That's why I took off. The doctor in there gave me only a couple of months, and then I also found out about her illness. Everything just came together. In short, I'll be following her soon. Thank God I met you then, through fire and water, and now I can die in peace, knowing you won't abandon my daughter." After these words, Billy coughed heavily again, and Robert realized he needed to go to his friend urgently, otherwise he might simply not make it in time to find him alive. Billy strictly forbade him from contacting doctors. Robert arrived a couple of days later. He didn't tell Sarah. Just then, Susan also informed him that the guardianship documents were ready and he could pick up the girl. Only she didn't have any warm clothes. She had grown over the summer, and she wasn't a small child anymore. The next day, Robert bought everything necessary and drove to his hometown. He didn't know then that his wife was on the same train with him and saw the situation completely differently. In the evening, he and Billy discussed what to do next. "Have you seen your daughter at all? Talked to her?" "No, and I shouldn't. Here's what I've come up with these past few days. Let's tell her that you are her father." "Right, and my family will kick me out, and nobody will believe it. I lived very far away at the time she was born. I finished my studies, got my first assignment. The children were just starting kindergarten. But nobody will believe I could have been fooling around on my wife during that time, and I don't want to take a child into the family and start with a lie. It's better to say I'm a very distant relative. It's also a lie, but at least it won't threaten my family. We'll come up with something." "No, we won't come up with anything ourselves. I'll pick her up tomorrow, bring her here. You'll talk to her and tell her everything yourself." "No." "Why not?" Robert sincerely didn't understand why Billy was so resistant. After all, he loved the girl's mother, he would love her too, but circumstances didn't allow it. "Because, look at yourself and at me. What kind of father would you want? A handsome and fit officer or a sick, dying convict? You're silent, that's it. And I don't want her to get a father like that. It wouldn't occur to me to be ashamed of my parents. Because you got parents like that. But I was ashamed from childhood. Always drunk, dirty, abandoning us with my sisters. Even though I lived with my aunt, I still went down the wrong path. And as for my sisters, there's nothing to say. They couldn't make it in this life." Robert didn't ask what Billy meant when he spoke of his sisters. He himself barely remembered them. The girls were no more than 5 when they were taken to the orphanage, and they never returned home. Billy visited them a few times, but he always came back looking like thunder. Life in the orphanage was never sweet, especially for 2 little girls. "She didn't have a father at all. I was told she's a quiet and modest girl. Tell her the truth. Don't hide it. It will be easier for you yourself." At this moment, there was a knock at the door, and both men jumped up from their seats as if on command. 2 hours earlier, Robert's wife, Sarah, had followed her husband off the train at the station. Since she didn't know where he was going, she decided not to lose sight of him. He transferred to the suburban train, and she settled behind him, guessing he was going to his hometown. She had never visited her in-laws, so she was afraid of getting lost in an unfamiliar city. It seemed her husband was so deeply absorbed in his own thoughts that he paid no attention to anything around him. A couple of times he almost noticed his wife, his gaze sliding over her indifferently. He seemed to have dimmed over a few days, turning from cheerful and lively into thoughtful and gloomy. Seeing her husband enter the entrance of one of the buildings again, and then the apartment on the second floor, Sarah decided to sit on a bench and think. She needed to calm down, collect her thoughts, and decide how to start the conversation and how to explain her presence in her husband's hometown. After sitting for about half an hour, she decided to go up to the apartment and talk to her husband. After all, sitting here, she wouldn't find out anything. If he was there with a woman, then so be it, they would divorce. She loved her husband, but she would never agree to share him with anyone. Sarah never thought that walking up a couple dozen steps would be such a difficult task for her. Her legs completely refused to obey, her hands became cold as ice, and her temples began to throb. Gathering her strength, she raised her hand and knocked. Muffled voices were heard in the apartment, which fell silent after her knock. "It's me!" Robert and Billy jumped up as if on command, exchanging silent glances, trying to figure out who could be knocking on an apartment that had been empty for many years. "Are you expecting someone?" Robert asked quietly. "Are you out of your mind? I didn't even tell anyone where I was going. I've been covering my tracks for months, taking different routes, trains, buses, so they wouldn't track me. In the end, I haven't shown my face outside that apartment. Maybe it's someone for you. That class prefect of yours, Susan, who won't leave you alone. Or one of the neighbours. Well, maybe, although I haven't really talked to anyone and asked them to call before coming. You hide, and I'll open it. If it's for me, I'll jump off the balcony." "Where are you going? You can barely walk. Sit still. If it were the police, they probably wouldn't be so polite as to knock and wait for an answer." Billy, of course, decided it was the police coming for him. Rushing to the balcony, he began to calculate if he could run after jumping from the second floor. Robert, realizing what Billy was about to do, silently grabbed him and shoved him into the room that had once been his parents' bedroom. It locked from the inside, and the windows faced a quiet courtyard. "Sit quiet and don't do anything stupid. Maybe a neighbour saw me." "I'm not going back to the zone. I'd rather be taken down during an arrest, but I'm not going back there." "Sit quiet. Maybe you'll get lucky." Robert quietly closed the door and went to the front door. The peephole didn't allow him to see the figures outside, but it was clear it wasn't the police and they weren't there for Billy. How great was his surprise when, upon opening the door, he found his wife, Sarah, on the doorstep, who had so shamelessly lied about a business trip yesterday, and from whom he had been hiding the fact that another child would soon appear in their home for several days. "What are you doing here?" "I was about to ask you the same question. Did you also go on a business trip?" "I did go." Seeing his wife's eyes, Robert realized he couldn't and didn't want to lie to her anymore. "Come in. I'll tell you everything now, and then you decide." Letting Sarah into the house and closing the door behind her, he went to the small room and knocked on the bedroom door. "Come out. It's for me," Robert said, indicating Billy, who was coming out of the room. "Yes, my childhood friend. I told you about him." It was noticeable that Sarah was surprised by Billy's appearance. "You said he was older than you, but I didn't think he was old enough to be your father." "Hello, I'm only 2 years older. Life has just battered me thoroughly." "Sit down. I'll tell you everything now. Let me just make you some tea. You're all chilled." Only then did Sarah notice that she was shivering and her hands hadn't warmed up. Perhaps she hadn't expected to sit in the cold for half an hour in light clothing. For the next hour, Robert and Billy took turns telling her about the circumstances that had brought them together in this apartment today. Sarah listened and couldn't believe her ears. On the one hand, she was glad that her fears about a mistress were unfounded. On the other hand, she was surprised that her husband had made such an important and responsible decision without informing her. She also honestly told them about her fears and thoughts of a mistress. Now that the reason for her husband's mysterious behavior was known, Sarah even felt a little embarrassed about her doubts. "So, darling, we now have an important decision to make, to take another child into our family. You've already made that decision. We have to decide how to tell the girl who we are and who her real father is. By the way, you haven't called her by name even once." "And I didn't know it," Billy said. "I was forbidden even to mention her name so as not to upset her mother. And because of the medication, she barely spoke and hardly recognized me." "I know. I was given all her details. I just wanted to introduce her to you tomorrow. Well, the girl's name is the same as yours." A whole range of emotions that overwhelmed Billy at that moment was reflected in his eyes. It had been a long time since Robert had seen men cry. Stern military men, his friends and colleagues, did not allow themselves such weakness. His father, Arthur, also considered tears a disgrace for a man his whole life. Billy looked at Robert with eyes full of tears and couldn't hold them back. His beloved, his only beloved, had given their daughter his name. Billy couldn't control his emotions for a long time. Robert's wife, Sarah, even had to rummage through her purse and find a sedative pill, under the influence of which he quickly fell asleep. And she and her husband had a long and serious conversation ahead of them. Sarah didn't want arguments, quarrels, and scandals. She understood her husband couldn't have acted differently, but his secretiveness hurt her. He had been silent for so many days, deciding something, inventing things, although he had never allowed himself secrets from his wife before. The only exception was his work. Sarah knew absolutely nothing about it and never inquired. Otherwise, they had no secrets from each other. Over the many years of marriage, they had managed to maintain a wonderful relationship. They met when he was still a cadet at college. Handsome, tall, athletic, many girls looked at him, but he chose her. She attended a school next to his college. Girls from her class often ran to discos at neighbouring community centres, hoping to meet handsome cadets. But military boys were completely uninteresting to her, and she didn't consider herself old enough for dates. Robert noticed her when she was walking along the embankment with her friends. He singled her out then for her modest appearance. Of all the girls, only she had long hair and a modest dress. However, approaching her turned out to be not the easiest task. He even volunteered to paint the famous red stripes on the monument. That's how cadets celebrated their graduation every year. They didn't dare entrust this responsible task to just anyone. Only the most desperate took it on. Robert, however, was one of the proper ones, who were never allowed to do such things. But he wanted to surprise the girl he liked, so he volunteered himself. When he entered the military institute after graduating from college, Sarah plucked up the courage and went to study in the same city. Her parents supported her decision and never regretted allowing their daughter to enter a pedagogical college after the 9th grade, after which she went to a university located near the institute Robert had entered. The young people decided to get married in their 2nd year. Everyone told them then that such early marriages often ended in separation, but they loved each other so much that they simply ignored such predictions. A year later, twins, a son and a daughter, James and Emily, were born into the young family. That's when Sarah fully realized how successful her choice of life partner had been. Her husband, despite being at work and studying all day, tried to let her sleep at night, getting up with the children, changing diapers. He even learned to prepare formula half asleep. Contrary to popular belief, maternity leave not only didn't become a test of strength, it actually strengthened their union. Sarah studied part-time, planned to send the children to kindergarten and go back to work. Her husband suggested she learn some hobby for pleasure. His career involved periodic moves, changing garrisons. He managed to get a very good assignment in a large city near the capital. Sarah, with her pedagogical education, initially got a job at a local school, but couldn't stand the complete lack of free time, the workload, the constant complaints from superiors and parents. That's when the hobby courses she had taken came in handy. She found herself in floristry and flower growing. First, she grew a beautiful flower garden at home, and then learned to arrange bouquets, wrap gifts, and 2 years later opened a small flower shop. Robert was fortunate enough to stay at the same duty station for a long time. His wife's business moved slowly but surely uphill. She was able to open 2 more shops, expanded the range. At first, only her husband helped and supported her, and then the children did too. By the age of 40, Sarah looked wonderful, to the envy of her friends. She had a beloved and loving husband, wonderful children. James decided to follow in his father's footsteps, while Emily studied design. Overall, her life had seemed perfect until recently. Her friends were openly envious, her subordinates never tired of praising her, and her children brought joy with their successes. And now their marriage faced a serious test. Sarah was glad that her fears about his fidelity were unfounded, but the fact that he was ready to change their lives so drastically was disconcerting. She truly didn't understand how they would live on. Essentially, the young girl was a complete stranger to them, and if her husband hadn't agreed to help his old friend, she would have remained a strange girl to them. Now they were taking responsibility for another child with her own character, interests, and on top of everything, who had recently lost all her relatives. Sarah also believed that the girl had the right to know her real father, and she and Robert decided to try again tomorrow to persuade Billy to tell his daughter everything. Fortunately, the issue of finances didn't arise. The adult children were already partially financially independent. Their parents only gave them money for large purchases. Otherwise, both James and Emily were independent. Sarah tried not to think yet about how they would react to the new family member. Robert didn't try to justify himself or come up with other ways out of the situation. "Darling, I couldn't have done otherwise. He has no one but me. It turns out the girl doesn't either. I didn't tell you because I didn't fully understand what I was getting into myself. Haven't you understood in so many years of marriage that I'm with you in any situation, good or bad? But now it's not just about you and me. It's about the girl who doesn't know us at all. It's about our children who will now have to accept and love a girl they don't know at all. Not to mention that she might be against moving in with us. She's an adult. She makes such decisions herself. By the way, how is she herself? Is she ready for a new family?" Susan, who helped me gather the guardianship documents, said the girl is in a state of shock but is not against moving. As far as I understand, she's quite reserved, quiet. It's still unknown whether that's good or bad. Sometimes it's very difficult to reach an agreement with quiet people. We'll manage, I'm sure, Sarah smiled. You have no idea how often I thank fate for a wife like you. You chose yourself, she said with a smile. It's late. We need to try to get a couple of hours of sleep. Tomorrow is a difficult day, plus the journey home. By the way, what about Billy? He's very ill. He needs to go to the hospital. The police are looking for him. We can't even call an ambulance. Wanted posters have already appeared around the city. Recidivist, criminal. And he's just a sick, battered, unhappy person who doesn't have much time left. I don't know what to do with him, honestly. I'm not a little child to worry about. Billy entered unexpectedly, as if he had been standing behind the door for a long time. And yet you're right. I need help. You've already helped me, and you don't owe me anything more. You paid me back long ago for pulling you out of that ice hole. And you didn't owe me anything anyway. You would have gone in after me too if I had fallen through. So tomorrow we'll say goodbye. I'll go somewhere. If I make it, I'll write. If not, don't remember me ill. Robert and Sarah exchanged glances, understanding that arguing was pointless. Indeed, he was capable of deciding how to live on himself. But Robert's heart was uneasy. Are you sure you shouldn't tell her? You could tell her, just don't mention prison. Say you're very ill, that's why you can't pick her up yourself. No, I don't want to, and to lie, it's better to say nothing at all. It was clear that the man was hesitating, but Robert didn't pressure him. The decision, in any case, remained his. The next morning, leaving Billy in the apartment, Robert and Sarah went to the orphanage to pick up the girl. She had been there for several days, as the period for the guardians to collect documents had dragged on a bit, and the guardianship staff couldn't leave her alone in the apartment any longer without adult supervision. While they were dealing with the bureaucratic issues, a short, thin girl quietly entered the room. She looked about 10 or 12 years old. She didn't resemble a grown 15-year-old teenager at all. Her long, light brown hair was braided. Robert recognized Billy's features in her at first glance. The same eyes, build, hair color. Only Billy's gaze was cheerful, a little impudent, while the girl's was sad and thoughtful. She quietly greeted them, asked if she could go home to pack her things. Apparently, she had already been informed that she would be living in another city. The girl barely looked up at Robert and Sarah. The child psychologist who had been working with her said that her behavior was just the beginning. The realization of loneliness and loss of loved ones would come later, and it was difficult to predict how she would behave. Having settled all the formalities, the couple ordered a taxi to take the girl to her apartment to pack her things. The departure was scheduled for late evening, so Sarah suggested she visit her friends to say goodbye. I don't have friends, the girl said quietly. There's no one to say goodbye to, not at all. Yes, I had some in elementary school, but then Grandma enrolled me in music and art school, ballet, and with several tutors. There was no time left for friends, so they decided it wasn't interesting to be friends with me. How wonderful you are! You dance, play music, and study. Yes, I guess, the girl said in a colourless voice. It seemed that her activities didn't bring her any joy, and she didn't feel proud. At home, she packed photos, a few personal items of hers, her mother's and her grandparents', and clothes. Robert's wife, Sarah, was surprised that the girl walked past a shelf with numerous medals, cups, and certificates several times without even looking at them, as if she considered them completely insignificant junk that had no place in her small suitcase. If you can't fit everything now, we can come back soon to pick up the rest. I know the way now. I can take you. It's not necessary. I'll try to take only the essentials. The girl paused for a moment and added, I've never been called anything other than my full name. If you like, I'll call you that too. Did you not like it when I used a diminutive? I don't know, it feels strange. Do you have children? The girl showed interest in those who were to become her family for the first time. Yes, we have grown-up children, a son and a daughter, twins. They are 20 years old now. James will be a soldier, like his father and grandfather, and Emily chose a fashionable field, design. She loved to draw, just like you. She went to art school. She had a talent for it from a very young age. I didn't have talent. We had my grandfather's desire to burden me like a pack horse. I never liked drawing or dancing. I'm not a fan of showing myself in public at all. I'd rather sit quietly in a corner where no one bothers me. I always asked Mom to have a little brother or sister for me. How wonderful it must be to have a brother or sister, especially from birth. You're born with your best friend right away. But I wouldn't say they were best friends from birth, Sarah laughed. Rather, they were born with a partner in mischief and a partner in fights. That's what I meant. I always wanted a big family, but Mum was her parents' only daughter, and I'm hers too. And do you know anything about your father? Sarah asked cautiously. Yes, a little. Mum told me, secretly from Grandpa and Grandma, that he was a good person. He just got into bad circumstances. He loved her, and she believed that all her life, and said that he loved me too, even though he couldn't see me. Did she tell you anything else? Only that his name is also the same as mine. And would you like to meet him? Of course. To be honest, I hoped your husband was my father until I learned his name. At that moment, Robert entered the room. Seeing him, the girl returned to packing her things. We'll leave you. We won't disturb you. Get ready, Sarah said to the girl, and herself took Robert by the arm and led him to the kitchen, quietly closing the door behind them. She knows about her father and his name. You showed up at the wrong time. She might have told me something else. The girl is reserved, of course. We can't hide from her that her father is alive and nearby. What if he leaves this world and she never even sees him? I completely agree with you, but what about Billy? Listen, we are going to raise this girl. We need to think about what's best for her. That's why, as a guardian, I've decided to introduce her to her father. But since my general has decided, what can I argue about? Robert smiled, hugging Sarah. An hour later, they were climbing the stairs to Robert's parents' apartment. A taxi, loaded with several suitcases that the girl had helped pack, was waiting for them by the entrance. Sarah had packed everything that could help the girl adapt to a new place. The girl didn't ask why they had stopped here. It seemed she was under the influence of sedatives. As the psychologist explained, her psyche had indeed shut down from the outside world to make it easier to cope with the loss. Opening up and pulling her out of this shell would take a long time and gentle effort. Approaching the door, Robert opened it and asked Sarah and the girl to come in a little later when he called them. Closing the door behind him, Robert was surprised by how quiet it was in the apartment, as if no one was there. Walking into the kitchen and the room, he found Billy sleeping, lying facing the wall. "What are you doing lying down during the day?" the man said quietly, and gently touched Billy's shoulder. He didn't respond, so Robert decided to shake him harder and tried to turn him onto his back. However, it was difficult to do. His friend seemed to have curled up into a tight ball. At this moment, Robert understood what was wrong. Taking Billy's hand, he tried to feel for a pulse without much hope. Although it was clear from how cold the hand was, his friend had quietly passed away in his sleep. Most likely, several hours ago, he had already become stiff. He couldn't let Sarah and the girls see this, so he quickly stood up and went out to them on the landing. From her husband's look, Sarah understood. Something bad had happened. Meeting his eyes, she shook her head, explaining everything without words. I already told you, this is his parents' apartment. He stopped by to pick up some documents. Go down to the car. I'll catch up with you in a moment. Even a younger child would hardly believe such a ridiculous explanation, but Sarah was incapable of more. When the girl slammed the entrance door shut, she turned to her husband with a question. Am I going with her alone? Are you staying for the funeral? I guess that's what I'll have to do. I don't even know what to do about the fact that he's wanted. God forbid they'll arrest me for harboring a fugitive. Say you came to check the apartment and found him. I don't know what else to say. Try to say as little as possible. He left this morning. Robert felt a lump rising in his throat. His loved ones were leaving, and he couldn't do anything about it. Perhaps there comes a moment in everyone's life when a series of losses begins, which one cannot get used to. Hold on, you need to pull yourself together now. You can let your feelings out later. We're going to the station. Call when you can. Going downstairs, she found the girl standing by the car. Can I ask a favor? Of course, my dear, anything. Promise not to lie to me. I promise, Sarah blurted out before she could think. Why did we come here? Just tell me the truth. Sarah realized she couldn't come up with any more lies. Your real father lived in this apartment for the last few days. He lived here until this morning. He passed away. Please accept my condolences. We wanted to introduce you, but we didn't make it in time. For a few minutes the girl was confused and couldn't say anything. Finally, she composed herself and said, I want to see him. I won't be scared. I need to see him at least once to remember. Darling, is it worth it? He's gone now. Are your parents alive? Mom is, yes. Dad passed away a long time ago. Did you see him before he died? Of course. That's why I want to see him at least once. Okay, let's go into the apartment. They went in quietly. Robert was already calling an ambulance and the police. He froze with the phone in his hand, stopping mid-sentence, looking at his wife questioningly. It has to be done, she told him. She took the girl's hand. Where is he? In the room. Not for long. The police will be here soon. You shouldn't be seen. I'll be quick. Don't worry. I'll just look. However, the girl's courage only lasted long enough for her to cautiously step over the threshold and see the figure on the bed. With a cry, she turned to Sarah and buried her face in her shoulder. Sarah hugged the crying girl and quietly led her out of the room. Then she gently guided her to the car and helped her into the seat. They drove to the station in silence. The girl stopped crying, but occasionally wiped away tears with the edge of her collar. Boarding the train didn't take long. Moreover, Sarah was glad that it was already late evening outside. The girl lay down in her seat and soon fell asleep. But Sarah couldn't sleep. Besides the heavy thoughts about their future, worry for her husband was added. He had not only to organize the funeral, but also to try to prove his non-involvement in the presence of the escaped criminal in his parents' apartment. In the morning, the train arrived in the city that had become Sarah's home. She and her husband had lived here for a long time. Their children had grown up here. There was still plenty of time before the holidays, during which she had to inform the children about the new family member. The girl woke up early but didn't wake Sarah, just lay there silently looking out the window. Finally she said, "Do we still have a long way to go?" "No, less than half an hour." "Why did you take me? Who am I to you?" "Your father and my husband were friends since childhood. He asked him to look after you, and my husband couldn't think of anything else but to take you under guardianship. After 18, you will be completely independent and can decide how to live yourself. Sarah wanted to convey that the girl would be able to make important decisions herself, but the girl interpreted her words in her own way. So you just have to put up with me for 3 years and that's it. I can go wherever I want. Go wherever you want, darling. You misunderstood. I only meant that you will become independent, self-sufficient, and we will always try to support you. You can count on us, but you can live however you want. But until you'll put up with me and then kick me out. As far as I understand, you're not exactly thrilled about the idea of taking in just anyone born. I saw my father. Mum said he was only 3 years older, and that old man I saw yesterday. Who is he? My real father or an old man who somehow ended up in your husband's apartment? What's wrong with him? Was he homeless? Was he in prison? What? Sarah was struck by the change that had occurred in the girl overnight. Just yesterday, quiet and reserved, today she had become quite sharp, rude. I'm not sure I'm the one who should tell you all this. Just a couple of days ago, I knew nothing about your father or you, just like you. I actually thought my husband had a mistress in his hometown, and then I saw him buying clothes for you and decided you were his daughter. I bought a train ticket and followed him, and there I met him and your father, and they explained everything to me. To be honest, I was shocked, but I understand my husband. He couldn't have acted differently. And that means we all have to accept this fact and learn to live together. To conflict or to learn to cooperate, that's your decision. You are an adult. We will provide you with a proper quality of life, but how our communication will be depends only on you. It seemed such a direct answer, slightly calmed the girl's nascent anger, especially since Sarah had been warned that such a reaction was normal. Perhaps this way it would be easier for the girl to cope with the pain of losing her loved ones. And Sarah, as an adult, had to support her. It was amazing how quickly a complete stranger could become close. Just yesterday, Sarah absolutely didn't want to take a stranger's child into the family, and today she felt so sorry for the girl that she couldn't leave her alone without support in this difficult world. Sarah gently took the girl's hand and said, I know you're angry at everyone, including us, for how cruel fate has been to you. If you need to, be angry, vent your emotions. But don't harbour hatred towards us. We sincerely want to help you. As soon as you turn 18, you can claim your parents' property and move out. Until then, we all need to learn to live together peacefully. And you won't abandon me? The girl's voice trembled. It seemed she was about to cry. No, we won't abandon you, if it depends only on us. Your parents didn't abandon you either. They left against their will. Tell me about my father, please. Darling, I can't. I know almost nothing about him. I can only say he was very ill. That's why he looked that way. My husband can tell you more. They were friends since childhood. I remember him telling me how your father saved his life. Really? How? Tell me. We've arrived. Let me tell you that story at home, and tomorrow we'll go get you enrolled in school. I never thought I'd go back there. Did your children study there? Yes, and it's a good school, with strong, experienced teachers. My children even got into the universities they chose without tutors. And I also had a good school, but Grandpa and Grandma still hired a bunch of tutors for me. They cared about you. They wanted you to have a wealth of knowledge from childhood and not turn out like your father. I once overheard their conversation. He said he would pay any money for tutors, put you in any schools and clubs, just so your father's genes wouldn't show. And yet, he only wanted the best for you. It's just that sometimes adults, wanting to do something good, go a little overboard, not taking the child's wishes into account. They didn't get home until noon. Sarah called her shop, warned them she would be away for a couple of days. She took time off. Her deputy was surprised, but didn't ask questions. In all their years of working together, Sarah had taken sudden days off only a couple of times. She loved her work very much and devoted a lot of time to it, and Sarah decided to spend the day with the girl to help her adapt a little. Robert didn't call. This was starting to worry her. She was afraid to call herself, afraid of hearing something bad. In the evening, she decided to call the children and inform them that a new member had joined the family. She called James first. For some reason, it was always easier for her to reach an understanding with men. James's initial reaction was unexpected. "Mum, are you sure this is a good idea? A grown girl with such psychological trauma. What could come of it? You and Dad were never known for harshness or strictness in parenting. The fact that my sister and I turned out the way we did is only because of your example. But we grew up with you, and this girl didn't. She was raised strictly. What will happen when she feels you won't be so strict? 15 is the most difficult age, even when everything in life is calm, and she's lost her entire family." James seemed to voice all her hidden fears. She herself understood everything he was telling her, understood and was afraid. So she decided to be a little stricter with the girl at first, so she wouldn't take advantage. Emily supported her brother's concerns. She was more energetic, livelier of the two, sometimes even defending her brother. But here she completely agreed with him. The girl needed to be accustomed to freedom gradually, otherwise she would harm herself. Sarah was surprised that the children didn't object to their parents' decision, didn't ask unnecessary questions. Apparently, they had long been accustomed to the fact that their parents made only weighed and considered decisions. Besides, Mom said it was Dad's decision, which meant arguing was useless. In the evening, Robert called. His voice sounded very tired. After he and the girl had left, he waited for the ambulance and the police, reported finding an unknown man in the apartment. The death was natural, so the police weren't particularly interested in the discovery. However, after lunch, Detective Miller called and invited him to come in. Can you imagine? He invited me. Apparently, professional ethics have reached our valiant police force too. In short, I was informed that the discovered man is our friend. He escaped from prison. He came to the apartment, apparently, because he had nowhere else to go. Anyway, I took on the funeral arrangements. Nobody was surprised, especially since I said we were friends in childhood. I'm leaving tomorrow afternoon. The police have no questions for me, no reason for investigation, and no cause to create problems for me. Thank God, I was so worried. And how are things with you? James called me, shared his concerns. I called both of them. They accepted our decision unexpectedly easily, but both said to be stricter with the girl at first. I agree with them, although it's not our method. However, Sarah couldn't follow the advice. In the evening, the girl asked to go out for a walk. Sarah offered to accompany her, but she flatly refused, saying she was already grown up and wouldn't be out for long or go far. I won't go so far from home that I'll get lost. You have my phone number, I've memorized your address. Okay, but try to be back by 7 in the evening. I know that's early, but you don't know the city. Besides, it's not the safest neighborhood. Even though you're quite grown up, you look very young. When I first saw you, I thought you were no more than 12. Be careful. Or would you like me to walk with you? No, I want to be alone for a bit. Okay, but try to keep your phone on. The girl nodded and left the apartment. After 7 in the evening, Sarah decided to call herself. The girl's phone was off. After half an hour of fruitless calls, Sarah decided to go look for the girl. It was already starting to get dark outside. Sparse passers-by hurried home, pulling up their collars against the piercing wind. After circling the house, all the nearby squares and courtyards, Sarah decided to call her husband. He should have just boarded the train home. "What's wrong?" "The girl is missing. She asked to walk around the neighborhood. We agreed she'd be back by 7. Phone would be on. It's now 8:30, and her phone is off. Should I go to the police?" "They won't even take a report from you. I think this is her way of testing the boundaries. This is exactly what we talked about. We can't let her walk all over us, otherwise we won't be able to handle it. I'll arrive in the morning and we'll find her together if she doesn't come back earlier." However, even in the morning after Robert's arrival, there was no news from the girl. They decided to go to the police, as the girl didn't know the city and could be in trouble. Robert asked Sarah to wait for him outside, and he went to the investigator. "Listen, could you give me the addresses of places where young people gather in our city?" "But you said the girl is quiet and modest?" "The girl was just taken from the orphanage yesterday, and before that she grew up under total strictness." "I see. Let me look. There are quite a few such places here, to be honest. It would be good if she didn't end up there. Our local troublemakers quickly turn such sheltered girls into homeless ones. Try to keep a better eye on the child." Having received the list of addresses, Robert and Sarah decided to start looking for the girl themselves. After visiting several addresses, they realized how incredibly lucky they were with their own children. Not once had their children caused them such intense worry. Both grew up active, but not reckless, of course. Like all teenagers, they got into various situations, but their parents never had to look for them in such places or go to the police. Robert waited for Sarah to say that he had started all this and dragged her into it, but Sarah, as in many other situations, was supportive and tried to help. They had taken on this responsibility together. It was pointless to blame her husband. In one of the courtyards, on a bench, they found the girl sleeping. It took some effort to wake her up. To their surprise, she didn't smell of alcohol. As she explained later, she just decided to go for a walk and wandered around the city for almost 24 hours until she fell asleep from exhaustion on the nearest bench. She turned off her phone on purpose. She wanted to be alone and think. "Didn't you think we would worry?" "I did. I'm not going to apologize." With these words, she turned away to the window and remained silent until they got home. At home, Robert decided to talk to her himself. "You said you asked about your father. Well, listen. I have never seen a more honest and fair person, ready to go through fire and water for a friend. He was ready to go without food for days himself, but bring something tasty for his sisters. He pulled me out of the icy water, even though he could have died himself, as he was half my size. He had a difficult life, got involved with bad company, went to prison. Yes, your father was a criminal, but he knew how to admit his mistakes. In that, you are definitely not like him. I don't see his honesty in you, his openness, his gratitude for kindness, nothing of what I valued and loved him for. If you want to live with us, you must live by our rules. Call so we don't worry. Keep your promises. Obey. Be respectful. I understand that you're not thrilled about the idea of living with strangers. If it's that difficult for you, I will take you back to the orphanage. Just 3 years, and you're free. Go wherever you want. You're your own boss. But if you want to have a family, loved ones, support and love, learn to adapt. We didn't force our children to be obedient. They learned from our example. James and Emily are not against you living with us. Sarah and I are ready to give you our attention, our care. But if you leave whenever you feel like it, don't answer calls. And then don't apologize. Don't unpack your things. We're going back. I'll give you an hour. Think about it. I'm not rushing you, not persuading you, but you either accept our terms or you don't." With these words, he left and closed the door behind him, not letting the girl say a word. The hour they gave her to think felt agonizingly long. They could hear her walking around the room, opening and closing the suitcase several times, moving a chair. Robert and Sarah sat silently in the kitchen and exchanged glances at every sound coming from the room. Finally, Sarah said, "Are you sure this is the way?" She needs to learn to make decisions. Adults made them for her before, but she has to grow up sometime. Some people take many years, while others grow up in a couple of weeks. Her father, it seemed to me, wasn't a child from childhood. He bore responsibility for his sisters. What happened to him during the years we didn't see him, I can't judge. But I remember him being mature beyond his years. By the way, I found out what happened to his parents and sisters. When the children were taken away, his parents, overjoyed, went on a prolonged drinking binge, froze the house's heating system, and froze to death. I was about 12 then. The adults didn't tell us, and they didn't tell Billy the truth when he escaped from the orphanage. They lied and said his parents had moved. And his sisters? His sisters repeated their parents' fate. After the orphanage, they found partners like themselves. Billy mentioned in passing that their lives didn't turn out well. In short, both are alive but living a lifestyle that is, to put it mildly, dishonest. Both have children in orphanages, so the girl has at least 3 cousins and a brother. How did you find that out? A neighbour told me. She recognised me when I was explaining to the police how Billy could have ended up in my parents' apartment. A cunning old woman, by the way. She immediately understood I was lying to them. She saw me arriving with him and carrying groceries, but she didn't turn us in. So she told me everything. By the way, they all live not far from here. We'll see what the girl decides. Maybe we'll tell her about her relatives. You don't need to. I heard everything. It turned out the girl had been standing behind the door for a long time and heard the entire conversation. I don't want to live like my father's family. I am ready to follow all your conditions, especially since yours are even milder than Grandpa's were. Only Mum used to spoil me before. Forgive me, I don't know what came over me. You don't owe me anything at all, and could have left me in the orphanage. 5 years passed. The girl graduated from school with honours and entered a pedagogical institute, majoring in sociology and social work. She wanted to help children like her father, help and protect them from the conditions they fell into, give them a chance to become normal people. She kept the promise she had made to Robert and Sarah. There wasn't a single problem with her. She studied, tried hard, obeyed, didn't talk back. Gradually, she became family to them. The older children also accepted the girl quite warmly. Emily became friends with her younger sister, often helped her choose outfits, and the girls went on vacation together several times. James took a long time to accept the girl. He was wary of her, expecting trouble. However, gradually, he also softened. The fact that he got married while still studying and had a son greatly contributed to this. "You've become a softie," Emily often told him, teasing her brother good-naturedly, who could talk for hours about what his child could do. "You just haven't been in my shoes. When you have your own, you'll become a softie too, I assure you." "No way. I don't want to be stuck in diapers and bottles from a young age. My career and travel are my priority. But if I want a little child to smear porridge on me, I'll gladly use my nephew." In fact, the girl adored the baby and spared neither money nor time for his whims. In all these years, Robert and Sarah never regretted taking the girl into their family. After the children finished school and moved out, the house seemed empty and quiet. Even though they both loved their work, the need to care for someone, to look after someone, was felt very keenly. By the time the girl graduated from school and moved out, a grandson had appeared in James's family, whom the happy grandfather and grandmother often took in, giving the young parents a little respite. They remembered how difficult it had been for them without parental help with twins during their student years. The girl couldn't bring herself to meet her father's relatives for several years. Neither of his sisters showed any interest in her, but their children were very happy that besides their parents, they also had normal relatives. The girl tried to visit them more often, give small gifts, tell them about herself, her life. She often remembered her first day in their family. Back then, she was given a choice, a calm life in a family with trust, mutual respect, consideration of interests, love, understanding, or an orphanage. In the couple of weeks she had spent in that institution, she understood that one should strive to leave there, not return. She chose family and never regretted it. Despite growing up in a family with a different way of life, she was able to adopt the family values that Robert and Sarah instilled in their children. When she met a wonderful young man several years later and decided to marry him, she first brought him to her parents so that they, with their life experience, could assess what kind of person he was. Both Sarah and Robert liked the young man. Gradually, life returned to its usual course, becoming quiet and calm.